Good evening, everyone. Welcome to KQED Live here in the Commons. My name is Ryan Davis. I'm the Executive Director of KQED Live, which is our live events programming side at your local public media station. And we are dedicated to bringing our journalism to life on stage, amplifying local culture, and deepening civic participation. And we do this by presenting screenings and talks, performances, food tastings, interactive game shows, and so much more. You can learn about all of our events at kqed.org/live. And we're very honored tonight to be partnering with the New York Times to offer this evening's program as a kind of prelude to their all-day event, A New Climate, tomorrow at YBCA downtown. It's featuring an array of industry leaders and thinkers reimagining our climate future. And tonight, we're focusing our lens on the role of artistry in the climate effort. We'll meet a range of local creatives whose practices and projects are responding with inventive concepts and technological reframings to make us look at the escalating crisis with immediacy and hope. Our host this evening is the editor of Headway at the New York Times. It's a new journalism initiative to tackle complex global and national initiatives. And prior to his role at the New York Times, he worked at NPR, leading the launch of the teams behind Code Switch and NPR Ed. Then he served as the executive editor at The Atlantic and editor-in-chief of Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting. Wow. Exactly. Please join me in welcoming your host tonight, Matt Thompson.
Thank you, Ryan. And thanks to all of you for joining us for this event about art and warming in art and tech in a warming world. Climate change, of course, inspires many emotions and many reactions in all of us. And the artists, scholars, and activists that we're going to hear from today have channeled some of those expressions into their work using a variety of different media, a variety of different technologies. Before our panel conversation tonight, we're going to see and hear and experience some of their work, what inspired it and how it was made. But first, I would like to introduce, and please join me in welcoming to the stage, Anaya Butler, a poet and organizer with Youth versus Apocalypse. Welcome, Anaya. And without further ado, our first performance.
Hello all. Today I'll be reading a poem titled Wide-Eyed Black Girl. Wide-eyed black girl, looking at the colonizer's knee on her dad's neck. I can see the terror in her eyes. I see orange skies and can taste the pollution in the air. The pollution shoves down black and brown people's throats. I can hear the slave catcher, police officer, gloat about the process of taking that black man's life, depriving him from his breath, laughing about having his knee on that black father's neck, leading to death, murder. Melanated folks out in the streets, fists in the air, voices loud, but somehow we are still not heard. We are only heard when things catch on fire. I am tired. I'm responsible for a mess I did not create. I'm hated for the color of my skin. I'm laughed at for standing up to a cause that is too white but affects too many black communities. I can only imagine the pain that Delana Yan's family is feeling, the pain that Adam Toledo's family is feeling, the pain that Dante Wright's family is feeling, the pain that Makia Bryant's family is feeling, the pain of the families of innocent people murdered by the police and white supremacists, two groups that overlap heavily, are feeling. Climate change is not the only thing disproportionately killing black and brown communities. Racism is not only a belief, it is a fatal disease. Racism is the foundation of this country, along with colonialism, capitalism, patriarchy, and white supremacy. I am angry that we are too busy fighting each other to recognize that we are not the ones who cause these crises. We are not the ones investing into institutions of destruction. We are just following the systems that put us here, the same ones that are corrupt. It is time for them to listen to our instructions. Wide-eyed black girl, witnessing black and brown people at borders, separated from their families, put in cages like nothing should be, for seeking asylum from a country who was one of the main reasons for this global catastrophe. How can we justify a country that has been founded on the kidnapping and enslavement of my ancestors, the genocide of indigenous people, and theft of native land? How can we justify a system that does not allow every human being, every living thing to thrive, to live, to breathe? I will breathe. We need to build a world with foundations of equity, sustainability, and honesty. We are not asking for sympathy. We are not asking for anything. We are demanding action against the climate crisis, action against brutal border control, action against police brutality, action against every single oppressive system and activity that are killing marginalized communities. Wide-eyed Black girl once saw a police officer take her father's life, his breath. Wide-eyed Black girl is now the one getting her life, her breath taken away. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for that performance, Anaya. Now, I've got to ask, tell us about Youth versus Apocalypse.
Yes. Youth versus Apocalypse is a Bay Area-based group led by predominantly frontline youth fighting for climate justice and social justice, recognizing that both of the issues are not separated but very intersected.
Excellent. Now, climate change, of course, sea level rise, toxic air and water, all the attendant ills inspire a lot of reactions in us and a lot of actions in us. Why do you hope that young folks make art?
Yes, art is one of the few forms, at least for me, where I'm able to confront the full and absolute truth and express that. I think it can also be a way to just deal with all of these crises that are happening for a lot of youth. They're dealing with climate anxiety, along with just being general teenagers and dealing with those type of things, and so many other oppressive systems that we face every day. And so at least art in my poetry is a way for me to express that drive and that want to fight against these systems, but also is a way for me to take care of myself. And I hope that, I know that other youth relate to that.
Well, Anaya, thank you so much for sharing your work with us this evening. And please join me once again in thanking Anaya.
Thank you so much.
And now I would like to invite to the stage our panelists. Beginning to my right will be Dr. Wendy Silver, is a professor of environmental science at UC Berkeley and a science advisor for the Climate Music Project. Welcome, Wendy. Dr. Misha Cardenas is an associate professor in the UC Santa Cruz Departments of Performance, Play and Design and Critical Race and Ethnic Studies, as well as the director of the Critical Realities Studio. Welcome to the stage, Dr. Misha Cardenas. Ana Teresa Fernandez is a multidisciplinary artist and the creator of the first work we'll discuss today, On the Horizon. Ana Teresa, welcome to the stage. So, Ana Teresa, I am going to begin with you and begin by talking about this work, On the Horizon. First, tell me where this piece began for you.
Well, it actually originated as I was seated as an audience member when I was invited to speak at a panel at the Art and Environment Conference in the Nevada Art Museum in 2017. And I heard an artist speaking on the panel of art and environment. She said that sea levels were going to rise 6 feet in the next 30 to 50 years. And as I was sitting there as an audience member listening to this, I thought, 6 feet, damn, I'm a tall Mexican, I'm 5'10". That's actually taller than me. And I had this really visceral experience of all of a sudden, everything went silent and being consumed by water in that moment and thinking about what that meant. And actually, physically, what that manifestation would feel like and how important it is to actually understand that. And I started asking myself, how many people really understand what 6 feet means and feels and smells and tastes like? Because I think as a person that reads and listens to information, I think that we were in absence of the somatic experience of information.
So this process, this realization, and this beginning led you to an installation. We're going to see it in just a minute. But before we do, how many places have you staged this?
I think 6 at this point, 5, 6. 3 different countries in Mexico, here in the United States, and several East and West Coast, and as well as Cuba. We wanted to do the installation actually at border sites, so thinking about the West Coast, so doing it here in California and doing it in Tijuana at the border site, and then doing it in Miami on the East Coast with doing it in Cuba, thinking about the borders and how the only border that truly exists, as Rachel Carson says, is the border between land and sea, and how that border is not static, but it's migratory, and how it is in complete contrast of the borders that we actually physically implement around the world, thinking about the natural border, how it constantly migrates minute to minute, hour by hour, and how that was really important to be able to articulate within the piece.
When you stage on the horizon at a different site, what is the role that the community at that place plays in its construction?
They breathe life into it. So not only is it made by the community at each and every site. In Tijuana, we had orphans from Unime come out and help us fill out the tubes, and these are kids that are in an orphanage that actually suffer from HIV and AIDS, and they were the ones that, they're learning about these ecological and climate change effects, and they were the ones that wanted to take care of creating the piece. And so we did it there, as well as some teenage musicians who wrote and composed music to play within the site. As well in Cuba, music has been kind of like this ongoing relationship that we've had with partnering and collaborating with. But I think that having the piece be brought to life and kind of have this breath be brought to life but by the community members and engaged and collaborated by very site-specific creative individuals and collaborated with is what really makes it unique and site-specific each and every time. So it really changes and transforms according to the location.
Well, let's see a little bit of it right here. Can we play the video of On the Horizon? You have a name for those plexiglass columns. You call them
Sea bodies.
sea bodies. What is the significance of that name for you?
Well, we address the ocean as a body, right? It's the body of water. It's the main body of water. So if we constantly talk about it as a body, we fail to recognize what a body constitutes. So if we think about it as a body, it's one of the longest lasting bodies on the planet. And so one of the things when we had the tubes set up, the sea bodies set up at Land's End exhibition, where we were able to bring the Sunset preschool, and I said, think about how old your grandmother is. Think about how old her great-great-great-grandmother was. So if these are bodies that we tend and we care and we hug and we embrace, right? Anyone we love, we treat with tenderness. So if we were to place the body of ocean, and which we did on Sunday, where we transported 170 gallons of water from the bay into YBCA to do the installation for climate change, the climate change event, Climate One for New York Times. She smells, she's a person. So it's like, we want to think about it as the ocean as a tender, living, breathing organism that is a body in itself, that has carried with it the history of us treating and imposing our own objectives onto it. And so thinking about it, it's 6 feet tall, it's the dimension of an actual body. And so having that relationship exist in front of you where you can smell it, you can hold it, to me, it's really imperative that we have those senses awakened in front of us and seeing them as bodies and not just like this foreign, distant entity that's away from us, but with us.
So I happen to be exactly 6 feet tall. 6 feet is it's a choice, right?
Yeah.
Now, there's a range. So the data that created that figure, 6 feet, is the level that the sea might rise if emissions are to continue at a particular rate. And it may rise higher than that. It may rise lower. How do you think about situating the experiences of your art in that choice?
Well, I think that there are many disparities that occur, sadly, this day and age, intellectual disparities, laborial disparities. But one of the things that, as I started embarking on this project, is that I also realized that part of why there's such a distant relationship to water is because a lot of people around the world actually don't swim. And so their relationship to water is non-existent. So when we say 6 feet of water, they actually don't know what that means and what that feels like. There's actually less than half of the people on the planet that know how to swim. 1 in every 3 women know how to swim. 6 in every 10 men say they know how to swim, but that's to be... Unfortunately, the most amount of deaths are young men. They think they know how to swim. But so thinking about disparity, and which for me, it's experience in relationship to someone, to something. The disparity, the intellectual disparity is your relationship to information, whether it's educational, professional, the same as laborial. So if there's a disparity of not understanding and knowing how to swim, you have no relationship to water and what that means, your body within a body of water. Not only that, but the disparity of our relationship to water in terms of a negative connotation, which is, as Mexicans, as brown folks, we're often called mojados, wetbacks. So we don't have the plethora of positivity that's like abundance, fertility, mobility, all of those beautiful positive metaphors. Oftentimes minority and brown folks get the negative connotation of water. So for me, being able to reclaim water as a positive experience, it's an experience that you can connect to ocean water as a body and have a positive experience where you can understand and really smell, hold, be able to have this exchange with it as both the past and the future all at once in the present is truly imperative.
I think we'll probably be talking today a bit about agency in all of the performances and art that we discuss. One of the things about this piece, it is a warning, it's an evocation, it is it's a reification of what this future might look like, possibly. I'm curious, what are some of the reactions that you've gotten to observe among folks helping you create this art and just observing it in the wilderness?
The first thing that kids do is hug it. They come and hug and embrace the tubes. They look through them. They see that the refraction occurs. So there's this beautiful, like really gentle effect that happens. Adults, the first thing they want to do is they want to touch it to feel that it's really there. They know that it's water, but somehow it's like they touch it and they're like, oh, it's water. And it's like, but you knew it was water. Like, so it's this suspended disbelief of magic realism within realism. So it's a little meta. And they have to touch it, you know, and then they want to move it to see, like, and so I think it's the context of them being placed and suspended within that verticality, because we experience the tidal flows horizontally. We move back as the tides come in. Regardless of king tides, the perigean tides, how high they are, we always experience it at our feet. So for them to experience it at the shoreline within that vertical U size, it's like, especially with kids and watching them just do this and want to jump and touch the edge, it's really magical. I think for them, it's really this surreal moment where they're trying to grapple with it.
And just before I turn to Misha, I would like to tell us about this bucket brigade. What is the experience of being in? How long was the bucket brigade to get this installation to the water, to the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts?
There's a couple people in the audience whose lats are still very sore, so I really apologize for that, but your biceps will thank me later. No, but it's a mile long. So the New York Times was pretty welcoming about me bringing forward this crazy idea of trying to get the community to harness the energy from the community to engage on this endeavor of actually brigading for 10 blocks. It's a mile distance, and it happened to be during the flight of the angels, the blue angels, the fuckers. And so as they were flying around and there were Marine people walking back and forth, there were like a group of community members with a bunch of buckets, and I illegally parked on the Embarcadero. I didn't see it illegally, but we did, on the water, and I climbed over a fence and I was like hauling water, and there were like a bunch of people, over 100 people asked us what the hell we were doing, you know? But it was this incredible experience where like it just transformed, like all of a sudden we became this weird typhoon of energy where we just got into the momentum, and we carried 170 gallons of seawater from the Embarcadero into Yerba Buena. And when we arrived there, it was this like euphoria of like, we fucking did it. Like, we did it. And I was like, yes, we did. Yes, we did.
Art installation, opportunity for reflection, and also boot camp.
Yeah, I can right. Work on biceps and buckets, man. It should be a thing.
Misha, I would love to talk about your work. So you are an associate professor in the departments of performance, play, and design, and critical race and ethnic studies.
Yes.
What happens at the intersection of those two fields?
Oh, yeah. Well, I do. I mean, I make artwork and write critical theory about it, and make artwork like Scene Soul, which is asking people to think about climate change from an intersectional lens. Think about how if we're thinking about climate change, we have to be also thinking about race and gender.
Yeah. And tell us just a little bit about Scene Soul. What was the beginning of this project like for you?
Yeah, thanks. This project started in 2017. I was living in Seattle, teaching at University of Washington, and there was a huge historic wildfire in British Columbia. So huge that the whole city of Seattle was covered in thick black smoke for weeks. So the title Scene Soul means no sun. And I started basically writing poems about this experience. I think similar to Ana Teresa and similar to what I've heard from other people, it was a real visceral moment for me of experiencing a climate change event and just feeling transformed, feeling like, well, I don't know when the sun is coming back. you just, you know, wake up one day or leave work one day and then the sky is black. And it made me really think. It was just a very otherworldly feeling.
We've had one of those, I don't know who was here perhaps during the day of the orange sky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is a lot of people around the world by now have had the experience, unfortunately, yeah.
It makes you think of ancient mythologies about eclipses, and you channeled this feeling into an iPhone augmented reality experience.
Yes.
Tell us just a little bit, before we see a clip of this experience, or a trailer for it, tell us just a little bit about the protagonist who we're introduced to in it.
Yeah, the protagonist, Aura, is pictured there, or pictured up here. She's a trans Latina AI. She's a navigational AI who is breaking out of her gendered programming and refusing to follow orders, and is remembering things about humanity. Partly what I mean, the main impetus was to think about how climate change is disproportionately affecting people of color, immigrants, trans people, disabled people. You know, if you're supposed to shelter in place and you don't have a home because many trans people are denied housing, well, where are you going to go? You know, also I wrote partly about my experience as a trans Latina woman, and also about news stories of about people fleeing climate situations. Yeah, so Aura's an AI. I was originally thinking about her as a hologram, because I was thinking about holographic visibility for trans people in my new book, Poetic Operations, Trans of Color Art and Digital Media. I wrote about the challenge of, you know, the trap of visibility. Many people know now that visibility is not the answer. You know, being on TV and magazine covers did not reduce violence against trans women. It caused more murder, actually. In 2014, I mean every year, but the dramatic spike in 2014. So I was thinking about a trans person that could shift and change, and part of really representing the survival strategies that I was using or that I see other people using. So holograms spoke to me in that way. But I wanted to also have another kind of layer of the poems where she's remembering things about humanity, just asking, you know, what are the AI going to remember of us?
Yeah. This is a question, I think it's a powerful question. I ask myself this all the time. Let's see a trailer for Sinso.
Hello. Hello? I am so happy you are here. It worked. I am here to tell you how the sky died. How those who traveled across borders and built homes here could only run to the ocean for fear of ice agents at the shelters. How I coded my own body and soul. How I escaped the bright orange wall of raging eyes of flame that turned the sky black.
So, I mentioned that agency was a theme, and games have been described as the medium of agency. You situate Aura in the user's environment, and you situate the user sort of in this future. Have you gotten to see people interact with this, and how do they interact with Aura and her world?
Yeah, I've installed it in a number of different museums and galleries. It was installed at the YBCA during the pandemic as a large outdoor, large-scale projection, which was awesome. And I mean, so the way you interact with it is with an iPhone or with an iPad, but in galleries, I've just seen people, moving around and just looking at Auda from a lot of different angles. Sometimes they really want to see the dog. The dog's an important part. She's guiding you to the next thing. Thinking about multi-species interdependence. Thinking about how the only reason I left the house was to walk the dog, because she needed to walk. And how we either survive altogether or we don't survive at all. So yeah, people move around a lot. Some people want to focus on seeing the poems, like for accessibility.
Can we dwell on that theme of multi-species interdependence for a moment? When you think about the AI considering us, our AI perhaps even outliving us in this future, what is our relationship to that intelligence, to that being?
In the future, I don't.
And what do you think that the AIs? So you've thought about what the AIs think about us, and that sort of animates Auda's experience here. What do the humans? What do you hope the humans think about the AI? How do you hope that we relate to this kind of being?
I mean, it's a really dystopian picture. I think that, but a part of the question, some of the questions being asked in this work are how do AI reveal to us our gendered and racialized biases? Why do people want a servant that has a female voice? And who says Siri's voice or Cortana's voice or whatever is female?
Yeah.
And, often I talk to audiences about this, and initial reactions were like, trans Latina AI, that's impossible. That doesn't compute, that doesn't make sense. I was like, I'll show you, it does actually make sense. Yeah.
I want to turn in a moment to another work of yours, Oceanic, a short film. But you've spoken before about thinking larger than humankind. You've spoken about thinking about a broader interdependent identity than just being human.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how that plays into this work and into the work that we're about to see.
Yeah. Well, so in Scene Soul, the dog's a character in the poems and in the story. I talk about her health and her demands, and I just try to depict our interdependence through the story. But with Oceanic, we are thinking, also both of these are big group projects. Scene Soul was myself and Marcelo Villaneto, Adrian Phillips, Dorothy Santos, Wynne Greenwood, Kara Stone, probably forgetting somebody, forgive me, Abraham Avnesan. And Oceanic is, there's 5 of us, myself, Cynthia Ling Lee, and Gerald Cassell are the 3 performers, and Susana Ruiz and Huey Trong did videography and 3D video. So yeah, with Oceanic, I wanted to kind of shift my attention to sea level rise and sea level and climate change's effect on the ocean. One of those effects is on kelp. And probably many of you know that I think 95 to 97% of the kelp in Northern California is gone because of ocean acidification. And so, continuing that thinking about how we survive altogether or not at all. But the focus on Oceanic was more, I made this in this past year in 2022. And in 2020, I lost my mom. And in 2021, I had my foster daughter left to another family, so I lost my foster daughter. And a lot of Oceanic, I was thinking about grief, and how do we make work through grief and with grief, and thinking about the intersections of COVID and climate change, and how do we grieve the people we've lost to COVID and the places that we're losing to climate change.
With that introduction, let's see a bit of Oceanic.
Climate change is a complex problem. with unprecedented implications for our future. How do you personalize a real sense of urgency about a problem whose most severe long-term impacts are potentially decades away? But our ability to avoid them exists only in the short term. You would need a time machine to fling us into the future to see what's coming, and then pull us back to the present in time to act.
That was a mistake.
So, yes, that was not oceanic.
Yes, not Oceanic. You can see Oceanic on November 11th at the San Francisco Transgender Film Festival. But we don't have a clip of it today. We don't have the app either because it's not done. Yeah.
So tell us about the technology that was involved in the construction of Oceanic.
Yeah. So in Scene Seoul, we used these 3D LiDAR scans to scan forests in the forest at Catches Lake. In 2018, that was like a suitcase-sized technology, a very expensive thing that you rent and carry out to the forest and take a 3D scan.
Does everyone know what LiDAR is, by the way?
It's a laser 3D scanner. Now they're in every new iPhone and iPad. Once I got one of those, I went to Natural Bridges Beach. It's a beach that Gloria Anzaldúa wrote about. She's a woman of color, Chicana feminist, really important to my work. And her essay about that beach that I live near, Natural Bridges Beach, was one of the first times any women of color feminist document addressed trans women and argued for the inclusion of trans women. And she's thinking about the bridge falling apart. Anyway, so I used these 3D scanner to scan the bridge there. And then to make that film, we used it to make these 3D scans or 3D videos of the three of us dancing, myself and Cynthia and Gerald. And I think I'm really leery of the capitalist drive for more technologies and expecting art to produce cool products. I don't want to do that. So I think of these works as kind of low tech. The other day a student said to me, like, really, come on. But I mean, it's a 3D scanner that's in every iPhone and iPad. There's a 3D scanning app you can use. And the AR thing, we're using Unity, but we use a Unity template. So I think of it as fairly low tech.
Aura and Oceanic both involve glitches. We've experienced glitches, all of us.
Yes.
What do you see as the meaning of the glitch? Why is it important, or why do glitches feature in both of these works?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I love what Ellie Russell says about glitch feminism. You know, that glitch can be a way of resisting the established order or the operating environment. A glitch in an algorithm can be a way of rejecting the operating environment for that algorithm. So we could think about glitches as, an example of resistance to capitalism or colonialism or, patriarchy. I also just, I feel like my aesthetic is more maximalist than minimalist. I'm not that interested in things being clean. I feel like the will to cleanliness is often the will to fascism. The will to purity is the will to fascism, and I'm not trying to do that. I want things to be messy and all mixed together and multi-layered, and to have our scan of the forest breaking on the ground and breaking on the forest behind it, and I feel like the function in Oceanic is partly. Well, Cynthia said that it's kind of like we're dancing with our own ghosts. There's parts of the film where we're on screen and the 3D scans are on screen, and I like thinking about that. I think, again, a big impetus in that work is to think about grief and how that we're going to need to face and deal with our grief to move through climate change. I mean, how do we begin to think about grieving 1 million people to COVID? Yeah. And how do we begin to think about grieving all of the species and people and places that we are going to be losing to climate change? Yeah. I heard when I was watching the news coverage of Hurricane Ian, I'm not a climate scientist, so I don't throw around a lot of numbers, but I did hear a climate scientist say that with each foot of sea level rise that's predicted, and they're predicting a foot by 2050, I think, that with each foot we should expect to lose 1,000 to 2,000 feet of landmass, of coast. Of course, that's different depending on where you are, but I've been reading the book Rising by Elizabeth Rush, and she talks about, it's a really great book, she talks about sea level rise in the Bay Area and millions of dollars that are being put into protecting the ecotones or protecting the marshlands. But she's like, the reality that most climate scientists will say to me is that we have to just say goodbye to the coastal areas we live in and move inland, because those areas are going to be gone.
Yeah. I expect we'll probably come back to this theme of visualizing a loss or visualizing an absence in our discussion altogether. I hope that you all have been thinking of some of your questions and beginning to compile them so that we can collect them and I can fold them into this conversation. But I would like to turn now to the work of Wendy. So Wendy, we are not going to be viewing one of the artworks that you've created today. You are a science advisor to the Climate Music Project. What does that mean?
Well, so the Climate Music Project is a wonderful organization that takes the work of scientists like me, the data that we produce related to climate change, both the drivers of climate change, but also some of the solutions to climate change, and sets it to music, working with artists. And it's a wonderful dynamic. There's a lot of tension there. And I can say, when you were talking about your art being messy, well, yeah, I know all about that messiness. Sometimes scientific data is messy. Certainly that communication and trying to figure out how do you take something that's produced by scientists where we're trying to get it just right with known error and produce it in a very often mathematical way and turn that into something that will evoke understanding and empathy and inspire people to make change. I encourage people to, if they want to learn more, to go to climatemusic.org, where there's a lot more detail and information on how it's done.
Well, now I would like to ask a little bit about your science and some of what you learned. In particular, I've been wrestling with this question, and I think you would be a very interesting person to ask it to. So one of the areas that you study ecosystems, as I understand it, and you've spent a lot of time with soil, and you've especially spent a lot of time with peat, wetland ecosystems, which we have some of here in the Bay Area.
We sure do, yeah.
Why is peat notable? I am a peat head, for the record, so why is peat notable?
So in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, which is a large area just a little bit east and north of here, we have this giant peatland that's been around for a very long time. The soils are thousands and thousands of years old. It's actually the source of 70% of California's drinking water, so it's a really important area. Oh. But it's these soils that were built from wetlands, so when the area was all flooded back in history, the soils became very anaerobic, meaning that there wasn't a lot of air, a lot of oxygen, and the microbes that live in that soil couldn't break down the plant material, and so it just built up and up and up and up and up, meters and meters and meters and meters of this organic rich material that couldn't break down. Well, that's wonderful, wonderful stuff to grow plants in if you could just get some air into it. So farmers and ranchers have drained a lot of the peatlands in California and also in the rest of the world for agriculture. These are some of the most agriculturally rich soils in the world. But when you do that, the microbes go crazy. It's like a feeding frenzy. And they chew through all of that organic material. Some of it goes to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. Some of it goes to the atmosphere as nitrous oxide, which is 300 times more potent at warming per molecule than CO2 is. And what's happened is the delta, the land in the delta has shrunk. There are some areas that are now 10 meters below sea level. And there are sites that I work in where they're separated from the bay by levees. And we're working on our field sites, and we look up and ships go by. right? If those levees break, it'll be catastrophic because that's where our fresh water comes from. The other thing that we're really worried about is as that peat sinks down, the salt water intrudes from outside and is slowly but surely putting our drinking water at risk. So the peat plays an incredibly important role. It helps hold the water back, helps hold the salt water back, but it's storing tremendous amounts of carbon and the nitrogen that drives some of these important greenhouse gases.
This is my favorite factoid, that peat, despite composing a mere 3% of the Earth's landmass, harbors twice as much carbon as the world's forests do.
Yeah, super important.
And a tremendous amount of carbon. So I think of peat almost as a natural technology. I mean, to one of the subjects of our panel, tech, I think of it as something sort of invented by the universe around the same time as humankind, about 12,000 years or so years ago, as human civilization, I should say. And it is now in what I would say is sort of a curious state. It is both one of the most carbon sequestering technologies that we've got, at the very same time as we're pinioning a lot of hopes on the onset of carbon capture technology, on an ability to pull carbon out of the air. How do you think about the role of natural technology and, let's say, artificial technology?
Yeah. You know, I think we need all of them. We have a long way to go to begin to flip turn the needle, really flip the dial on climate change. And so it would be easy to say, oh, you know, wouldn't it be great if we could just plug something in that's going to suck CO2 out of the atmosphere and solve our problem? And it would be great, especially if we could do it without using fossil fuels, which we can't do yet. But that wouldn't be enough. It's no longer enough. So not only do we have to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, but we have to slow emissions at the same time. So we have this big problem. We have to both lower emissions and store carbon. So we need to use everything that we have. And natural climate solutions, I mean, it's low-hanging fruit. It's stuff that we know how to do. Most of the people involved are the people who do things like grow our food or our wetlands, which help us maintain fresh water. Mm-hmm. So these are all things that we know how to do that we need to just step it up a little bit, really get it engaged.
So you spend much of your work immersed in data, in facts, in science. What was it that made you want to translate some of that knowledge into music?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. Two things happened. One was my son happens to be a pianist and had the opportunity to play piano at an event that the Climate Music Project sponsored during the 2018 Global Climate Action Summit that the California governor had sponsored. It was called Play for the Planet, and he got to play his piece, which he was at that time playing Aquarium, which is from Carnival of the Animals, Saint-Saëns, on the steps of the San Francisco Main Library. And I came to watch him play as my kid. He was a high school student. And it was absolutely fabulous to watch all these people walk by during their day, so during their lunch break or during rush hour, and hear this music and stop dead in their tracks, right? And then start asking questions. What is this? What's this about? That's beautiful. What does it mean? Why are you playing that? And this conversation evolved where it was clear that I could have been standing there with a graph and said, here's a graph, here's what climate's doing, right? And people would have just continued to walk by. But here was this beautiful music, and it was drawing people in. And that nabbed me right there. I said, how can I get involved in this? Do you need scientists? I'm not an artist. And they said, sure. And here I am.
So we are going to hear at the conclusion... After the conclusion of this panel, we're going to hear a performance by one of the artists who works with the Climate Music Project. But from the scientist's perspective, what is the process like of working with artists on these works?
Yeah, the first thing you need to do is decide, what is it that you're really going to focus on? And there's so much material, right? There's so many things. And one of the things I'm really excited about with Odyssey is it doesn't just focus on describing the problem, which can be a real bummer and can really be very depressing, right? I mean, climate change is a scary thing, but there are things that we can do to help slow climate change. And one of the things that I really like about this piece was that Eduardo looked both at what would the business as usual look like, and then what would it look like if we started to use the technologies and the approaches that we have to slow climate change. So he looked at carbon dioxide removal from the atmosphere. He looked at carbon sequestration in soils and forests. He looked at emissions reduction, and coupled that with, well, how would that sound? How would you express that, those feelings, the struggle, but as well as the reward at the other end? And there's several different ways in which you can translate data into music. Some of that happens through, I think of it as a gut-wrenching process of how do you take numbers and make them into notes and have it track exactly and then make it sound reasonable, right? And then there are other approaches where you take the general sense of the data and you put that to music. And then you compose that into a piece. And I think that Odyssey follows more the second type of approach.
Yeah. So Odyssey is the name, by the way, of the work that we'll hear in a few minutes. And in a few minutes before that, I'm going to hear some of your questions. We'll read some of those to the panel. But first, I'd like to ask a few questions to all of you. Anyone can answer. One is just technology itself is a bit fraught. I mean, as part of this, or implicated at least in part of this warming process that we are engaging in this conversation today. How did you think about, how was technology implicated in your work? How did you think about working with technology? How did you think about the mediums that you used and the processes of even transporting those mediums across, in some cases, I imagine, oceans, as you were putting that work together? Yeah. I'd be curious, especially Misha, given yours and a mobile.
Sure. I mean, you asked me that question about AI. I mean, I feel very critical of technology, of a lot of the tech companies in this region. I think there's a lot of concern for us to express. But this work, like Sinsol, you have to have an iOS device to see it, right? So part of why I chose to do that was, for one, just to put the issue where people's eyes are, and that is on their screens, sadly. We know why they're on their screens, because the devices and social media that we use are designed for addiction, to keep you looking at those things. But I'm trying to intervene in the stream where their eyes already are. But also, like I said, that kind of rejection of purity. I'm not trying to have some perfect moral position. And often in my work, I'm thinking about how trans women are also implicated in racial capitalism and colonialism and those issues. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So trying to get people to use the technology, but also to think critically about it. Mm-hmm. To think critically about AI when they're looking at that machine.
Yeah. Ana Teresa, as you were choosing your medium for On the Horizon, what process did you go to even find materials, and how did that play into the construction of the work itself?
I mean, it's very rudimentary. How do you suspend 6 feet of ocean water vertically? So trying to come up with a system, and I had been working with Jacobo, this migrant from Oaxaca who studied law actually in Oaxaca, and he's a master worker of the acrylic medium, and him and a scientist, Dennis Henner, and myself came up with this design to be able to most minimally and least invasively create this structure that could travel, this body that could literally travel and have this experience in multiple locations and have this life that just kept going. So that has traveled across borders. So like I said, this tube has gone through three different countries and has traveled across the border. And to me, it's more about again, I guess the very, very anti-technological, but getting back to the salt of the earth, of like passing a bucket. What is that? You know, like that's how one of the most ancient ways of being able to, you know, passing the word of mouth, person by person. So we literally physically did that across a mile. And the experience of like a kid as well, the intergenerational interactivity that happened on Sunday, which was having, you know, a mom pushing a 6-month-old in a stroller, as well as someone, you know, in their 70s, all participating and saying like, feeling as a part of a community by moving this body of water across a mile. I think it's the least technological thing one can do. You know, it's like using the wheel, so to speak.
And yet, everything that we make in some ways is a technology, right? Like we are tool-making beings in some respects. Acrylic itself, acrylic having geeked out on plastics, I will tell you, acrylic was, when it was invented, acrylic paint even became a brand new medium for artists to express. Some of those first artists to express themselves in acrylic arose in Mexico, where some of the first acrylics manufacturing happened. Diego Rivera, a whole fleet of artists began expressing themselves using this medium. Is it extricable? Can we extricate what we make artistically from what we make technologically?
Was that question for Anna?
That is for anyone on this panel. Yeah. Is there a separation between art and technology, I guess, is my question.
Okay, I'll dive in and say I want to resist that separation. I want to say no. I mean, part of what I write about in my book, Poetic Operations, is to urge people to think about algorithms as like a recipe or a ritual. That algorithms are not digital. They weren't invented in Silicon Valley. They were invented in the 8th century by Muhammad ibn al-Khwarizmi when he invented algebra. It was a long time ago in Uzbekistan. Yeah, technology. There's so many different kinds of technologies. You know, algorithms, decisions that we make every day about how to get where we're going and survive. I also think about like assistive technologies and different kinds of disability accommodations as technology. I mean, something that was really important to me about Oceanic is. You know, it is about grief, but it's also about thinking about how do we build better futures from this moment? How do we build queer futures, anti-capitalist futures, disability justice futures from this moment? And so, one of my collaborators is dealing with long COVID, like 18 million other people in this country are, and so I think that. The fact that we got together and made this work is a demonstration of like mutual aid and care and disability justice. I mean, everything about from where we were dancing to how long each dance piece is was all shaped around accommodations for that one person.
Yeah, and I think that similar to how you were speaking about, I think the short-term memory of today makes us easily forget and think that this generation has invented the algorithm or the hack. And I was like, excuse me, the what? Like the hack? Like it's called ingenuity, and it's been in third world countries for centuries. The idea of using, you know, tenderness and creativity to come up with a better solution, which is how most third countries facilitate their everyday lives, which is now called a hack. You know, I think that short term, like I said, it's like not knowing the history and the longevity in which we've accumulated data, whether it's visceral data or materiality data. It's the way in which we've been using it and applying it for survival for millennia.
I would say it goes back even further than that, because I think that there's tons of technology out there in the natural world that we're part of.
Absolutely.
Right? We're beings that have that embody technology. I think of photosynthesis, plants growing and pulling CO2 from the atmosphere. It's an amazing engineering system that has withstood the test of time, right? And works beautifully, doesn't break. And we haven't been able to replicate it, which I think is also wonderful, right? There's all those mysteries out there that we haven't been able to figure out. So I think it's this big continuum that technology, whatever we want to put our, put a circle around or boundary around is where we're living in the moment. But there's a wide range of technologies out there that are, from what's happening inside the cell to a musician who turns on their electric guitar, right?
Right. Now let me begin to DJ in some questions from the crowd to the panel, and I'm going to open these up again to all of you for answers. But this is a question about impact, and how do you think about closing the gap between climate art and climate action?
I think, I can't get away from touch, the senses. For me, that's the awakening of closing the gap and closing the distance of what we don't know, whether it's a culture, whether it's a phenomena, but understanding the smell of it, the touch of it. I think the proximity of wanting to care about it is what awakens the awareness. Thus, the proximity to move towards, wanting to know, the inquiry. It's like you can't, Aristotle best said it, it's like wisdom awakens with wonder. Without wonder, there's no inquiry to care. And so I think that whatever becomes alive within us to begin to love, that feeling of connection, belonging. So I think it comes back to the simplicity of love.
Misha, Wendy, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think about this question every day, all the time. I, like so many other artists in the 20th and 21st century, have tried to go beyond representation. Some of my earlier work was a lot more concretely trying to make interventions like building local safety networks for trans people of color in different cities. But switching to climate change, I felt like the way to make an intervention would be more to make space for people to feel their feelings so they could do something. So I feel like so often when I talk to people about climate change, they're like, that's overwhelming, it's depressing, I don't want to hear about it, I'm not doing anything about it. When I started Scene Soul, I was reading Staying with the Trouble by Donna Haraway, where she urges us to stay with the trouble, stay with the difficult feelings, and then something else will come. In the end of Scene Soul, there's a call for people to rebel and reject racial capitalism and the colonial order that we live in. But it's a balance. I also try to, my work is often multidisciplinary, multimodal, has different forms, right? So like with Scene Soul, I might do an installation and a live performance and a workshop around that to try to engage people into action, like some of the images you were showing, and probably something I'm going to do with Oceanic also.
Yeah, I would say that, one of the things I love about the Climate Music Project is that the music and the art really inspires people to think about their own impact and what changes they can make. And then our website has lots of details of actual actions that people can take. And I think and that the science behind those actions, which as a scientist to me is very important, because I don't want to see people waste time or money on things that aren't going to work. I want them to put their effort into things that are going to move the needle and make a difference. So, I think that the art brings us to the point of wanting to make change, and then with just small nudging and education, we can get people to make that change and start living it, and then we'll start to see what we need to see.
Yeah. So this question is a two-parter. It's a double-barrel question, and it begins with a binary. So I'll ask it to all of you at once. The first question is, do you ever feel defeated by climate change? Yeah, just yes or no, maybe?
No, I don't.
No.
No, I mean, I get scared sometimes because I know too much, but I don't feel defeated at all. I think that there's, maybe it's because, I skipped my college graduation to go to the SALT Treaty March in New York City. Some people who remember this, right? And we saw change, and I have maybe, people might not agree with me, but I have tremendous respect for the human potential to make change. And so I think we're just getting to the point, I wish this would have happened 10 or 20 years ago, but we're getting to the point now where people are feeling it and realizing it. And so I don't get defeated.
Oh, wow. Misha, Ana Teresa, any reflections on that question?
Yeah, I don't feel defeated. No, I mean I feel sad. I feel angry. I feel rage. I feel a lot of other things. I don't feel defeated. I think that. So I teach this book, All We Can Save, by Ayanna Johnson and Catherine Wilkinson. You might hear them tomorrow at the event if you're there. But it's a whole book full of solutions. And the number one, my favorite, is collective action. The solution is we all get together and do something and, use civil disobedience and interrupt the normal functioning of capitalism. So I think that for me is like the best solution that's offered, and it's not one that you're going to hear on the news. You're like when the IPCC report came out last summer, a lot of the news headlines were like "Code Red for humanity." They like to say like "This is the end. We have 5 years left." That's not what the report says. It says "Code Red for humanity" if we continue with the same amount of emissions. But it presents a bunch of other solutions and other possible outcomes. So, no. I'm like, when I was a teenager, I read like French existentialism. Jean-Paul Sartre really changed me. It's silly, dead French guys. But I feel like every day you wake up with freedom. You can do something or not. So that's how I feel.
Ana Teresa, I want to both invite you to answer the question and also share the second half of it, which is if you feel defeated by climate change, what inspires you to keep going?
Yeah, when I was doing an art residency in Haiti in 2006, I got really ill from surfing right off one of the towns there in Jacmel, and I think that when I feel the most close to kind of the defeat is because I'm a surfer, and so I go into the water and there's just moments where it's just like, where you feel like something's dying. When you taste it, when you smell it, you're in it and you're just like, oh, you just know you're gonna get an eye or an ear infection, and there's or some sort of infection. But to me it's like, is there I told them at the International Ocean World Weekend in Miami, when I was asked what could we do, and I said, well, can we teach Mitch McConnell how to surf?
Good luck with that.
Because I think a lot of these people are mostly on boats and yachts as opposed to on water. And I think, and I'm being super serious here, people, like put Mitch McConnell on a surfboard or a wave storm, a foamy, no, on a hardboard actually, so he can hit his head. But I think that, and I come back to the less than 0.5% of the world knows how to swim, because I think that if more people, especially from that demographic, I'm just like, take the fucking senators out to the water and surf, you know, and have them taste the water, especially off the coast of some of these towns. And once they experience it, they will know what it is that we're talking about. Because without experiencing it, you don't know what the water, what the ocean is going through. Once you smell it, once you taste it, you know there's something awry. And so, yeah, I think I'd be down to give senators a surf lesson anytime.
This question, which might be our last this evening, is not about senators, but it is about your advice for young folks who want to make climate the focus of their work. Wendy, how about I point that question to you first?
Wow. You know, I think I want every young person and every student to understand climate change and the science of climate change. But I also want everybody to learn about, I guess I worry about teaching that without balancing it with the understanding that these are the things that we can change, and then giving them the world and saying you can do that through art, you can do that through science, you can do that through political action. There's so many different ways. You can do it through writing and being in media. There's so many different ways in which you can have an impact. And so I would say that find your medium, you know, and then find your voice.
Yeah.
Find your voice. Ana Teresa, Misha, anything you would want to say to the young folks who want to make climate?
Sure. One of my favorite pieces of advice I got in my MFA was that the job of an interdisciplinary artist is to find all the most delicious ingredients to make the perfect burrito. And I think it's true. So, you know, when you look at my work, like I said, it's dance, poetry, film, digital media, art, games, all those things. And a couple of weeks ago, I was doing a talk for our first year students at UC Santa Cruz. And this student came up to me afterwards and she was like, thank you so much, because I was trying to decide, should I study marine science or should I study game design? And now I know that I could do both those things. So that's what I want to tell them, is to put it all together.
Teresa, would you like to take the last word on this question?
I don't know that I can follow these two. I think it's like...
Well, I would like you to join me in please thanking our panelists, Wendy, Misha, Ana Teresa. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and perspectives and your work with us this evening. And now I would like to call to the stage Mr. Eduardo Del Signore, the founder and president of A Call to Peace Foundation and a composer commissioned by the Climate Music Project. Eduardo, come on up.
Good evening.
Eduardo, I will ask you merely to introduce your piece that you are going to play for us this evening.
Okay. I gotta put this on the floor.
Certainly. Here, can I help?
Yeah, that's okay. There you go. And then, wait, there is more. So, then we plug the bass.
So the piece that we're going to hear now is called Odyssey.
Odyssey, yeah, it refers to a musical journey. Originally, I called the piece Wrinkled Science. But the scientists didn't agree with me. I was referring to the fact that during the first year of the pandemic, that there was like a lockdown, you know, and then like nature reacted incredibly and came back with full force, and you know a lot of the oceans, like even the Mediterranean Sea, got the chance for a year to clean up. So that caused a wrinkle on the graphics of the scientists. And that was my approach to it. But so one of them suggested, why don't you call it Odyssey, because it's like a journey. And then I said, well, maybe we can change the O for the AU and makes it like full circle. And that's where we're at now.
All right, well, I am going to leave the stage for a performance of Odyssey by Eduardo Del Signore. Please join me in thanking once again Eduardo Del Signore.
Martin Conte.
Thank you. Thanks also to our panelists, Dr. Wendy Silver, Dr. Misha Cardenas, and Ana Teresa Fernandez. Thank you to Anaya Butler. Thank you to the New York Times and to KQED Live. You can find out, just as a reminder, about all upcoming performances and live events from KQED Live at kqed.org/live. But last, of course, thanks to all of you for joining us this evening, and please give yourselves a Round of applause. And with that, thank you, Eduardo. Thanks to everybody. Good night.